Rachel never imagined that day would change everything. She woke up determined to save her marriage, with a plan in her heart and hope in her eyes. But by the end of that same day, she would be staring at the kind of pain that doesn't come from loss, but from truth. Have you ever tried fixing something that everyone else said was already broken? Have you ever bet everything on love, even when it felt like it was slipping away? Rachel did, and she paid a price no one should ever have to pay. Stay with me until the end because this story is going to stay with you. Rachel had always believed in second chances. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, she learned early on that love wasn't perfect. It was messy, loud, and sometimes painful, but it was also worth fighting for. That's what she told herself the day she married James. He wasn't perfect, but he made her feel like she mattered, like they were building something real. In the beginning, their love felt unshakable. They laughed at the same jokes, dreamed of the same future, and found comfort in each other's arms during hard times. But life, as it often does, began to weigh on them. Work stress, financial problems, and unspoken resentment started to chip away at the connection they once had. Still, Rachel held on. She believed that if she just tried a little harder, if she loved him a little more, they could find their way back. James, though distant at times, never pushed her away completely. That was enough for her to keep going. She thought love was supposed to endure storms, so she stood firm, waiting for the sky to clear. One day, Rachel decided she needed to do something big. She booked a weekend getaway to the cabin where they'd spent their honeymoon, a place filled with laughter, memories, and warmth. She hoped it would spark something between them, some forgotten ember that could reignite. James seemed surprised, but agreed. That gave her hope. As they drove through winding roads toward the mountains, Rachel watched James from the passenger seat. He looked tired, older, not just in years, but in spirit. She reached out to hold his hand, and for a moment he let her. That small gesture filled her with a fragile kind of peace. Maybe this could still work. But deep down, a quiet unease had begun to stir. She didn't know where it came from. Maybe it was the way James avoided eye contact, or the way he checked his phone when he thought she wasn't looking. Still, she pushed those thoughts away. This weekend was about hope, about healing. They arrived at the cabin just before sunset. The golden light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the wooden porch. It looked exactly as Rachel remembered, unchanged by time, like a photograph frozen in a happier moment. She stepped inside, the scent of pine and old memories wrapped around her. She smiled, hoping James would feel it too. That first evening, she cooked his favorite meal, rosemary chicken with roasted potatoes, and poured 2 glasses of red wine. They ate in near silence, the clink of silverware louder than their words. She tried to start small conversations, asking about work, about how he'd been sleeping, but his answers were short, distracted. He seemed somewhere else entirely. Later, that night, they sat by the fireplace. Rachel leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a while neither of them said anything. The fire cracked and popped, and outside, the wind moved through the trees like a whisper. She wanted to ask him, "What's really going on with us?" But fear held her tongue. What if she already knew the answer? The next morning, James said he needed to take a walk alone, said he wanted to clear his head. Rachel nodded, trying not to read too much into it. She spent the morning cleaning up, folding blankets, making the bed, doing anything to keep her mind busy. But every tick of the clock felt heavier, louder. She kept glancing at the door, waiting. Hours passed. He didn't come back. Rachel's heart began to pound. She tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She stood by the window, staring into the woods, the sinking feeling in her chest growing with every minute. Was he okay? Did he get lost? Or was this something else entirely? Just when panic started to take over, Rachel heard the creak of the front steps. She rushed to the door and saw James walking toward the cabin, head down, hands buried in his coat pockets. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. Something and his face had changed. He looked like a man who had made a decision and was afraid to say it out loud. He walked past her without a word, straight into the living room. Rachel followed, heart pounding in her chest. "Where were you?" she asked gently. James didn't answer right away. He sat down, stared at the floor, and after a long silence finally said, "I need to tell you something." Her stomach turned to ice. In that moment, the world seemed to slow down. Rachel braced herself for whatever was coming, holding on to any shred of hope she had left. James took a deep breath and said the words she'd never imagined hearing. "There's someone else." The room fell silent, as if even the wind outside had stopped to listen. Rachel didn't speak. Couldn't. Her legs gave way and she sank into the chair across from him, the sound of her own heartbeat roaring in her ears. She looked at him, really looked, and realized this wasn't something new. It had been there for a long time, in his eyes, in the distance between them. She had just refused to see it. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She asked the only question that mattered. "Do you love her?" James looked away, and that was answer enough. Her world cracked open, not with an explosion, but with a quiet shatter that echoed deep inside her. She had come here to save them. He had come to end it. If this story has already touched you in some way, leave a like now and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because sometimes, the hardest truths lead us to the strongest versions of ourselves. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Rachel wandered through the cabin like a ghost, unable to settle, unable to feel anything but the numbness that wrapped around her like a thick fog. James didn't try to console her. He stayed quiet, distant, respectful in the way someone does when they know they've destroyed something sacred. That night, Rachel sat alone by the fireplace, watching the flames dance while her heart broke in slow motion. She thought of all the nights she'd stayed up worrying, all the moments she'd tried harder, loved deeper, held on longer, for a man who had already let go. The realization hit her like a cold wave. She had been fighting for something that no longer existed. She went outside and stood beneath the stars, the air crisp against her skin. She remembered being here years ago, laughing with James, wrapped in a blanket, dreaming of the future. Now she felt like she was mourning someone who hadn't died, but was still gone. And the version of herself who had believed in forever, she was disappearing too. James came out quietly and stood a few feet away. He said, "I didn't mean for it to happen." Rachel turned to him, her voice calm but firm. "But you let it happen," she said, and for the first time she saw guilt flicker across his face. Not regret for what he'd done, but for having to face her pain so directly. They didn't argue. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations, just silence. And that silence was louder than any scream. Rachel realized she didn't want to beg, didn't want to convince him to come back, because now she understood. Love can't survive where truth is denied. That night, she wrote in her journal. She wrote everything, her anger, her sorrow, her confusion. But more than anything, she wrote a promise to herself. I won't lose who I am, because someone else forgot how to love me. The next morning, Rachel made coffee and sat at the table staring out the window. The forest looked different now, less magical, more real. She realized how much of her happiness had been built on hoping James would change, that he'd return to the man she once knew. But now she didn't want the past back. She wanted peace. James walked into the kitchen, quiet, hesitant. He opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, but Rachel raised her hand gently. "You don't need to say anything," she said. "I heard everything I needed yesterday." For the first time in a long time, she saw her own strength reflected in his silence. They packed in silence. No arguments, no pleading. Just the quiet understanding that something had ended. On the drive back, Rachel stared out the window, watching the trees blur into one another. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even angry anymore. She was empty, but also free. And freedom, even when painful, carries a kind of peace. When they reached home, James helped her carry her bags inside. He lingered for a moment at the doorway, as if expecting something, maybe forgiveness, maybe one last sign she still wanted him there. But Rachel didn't give him either. Not out of cruelty, but because some things can't be fixed with words. That evening, she called her sister and told her everything. For the first time, she let herself fall apart. And in that mess, in those tears, she felt something surprising. A flicker of herself returning. The version that didn't settle. The one who dreamed. The one who loved deeply. But who now knew where to draw the line. Rachel didn't know what came next. But she knew what wouldn't come back. And strangely, that was enough. Because sometimes, healing begins the moment you stop trying to hold together what's already broken. In the weeks that followed, Rachel began to rebuild, slowly, quietly. She rearranged the furniture in her apartment, got a new haircut, joined a yoga class. They were small changes, but each one felt like a step away from the version of herself, who had waited, who had begged, who had hoped too long. There were hard days. Days when she'd catch herself reaching for her phone to text James. Days when memories came rushing in without warning. But each time she reminded herself that healing isn't linear. That strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about choosing to rise again, even when everything inside you says stay down. One night she walked past a cafe and heard a song playing. Their song. For a moment it hurt. But she stood there, listened and let it pass. That was the turning point. Not when she stopped hurting, but when the pain no longer controlled her. It was just a part of the story now, not the whole thing. Rachel started writing again. Stories, poems, little thoughts scribbled on napkins. She didn't realize how much she had lost her voice until it came back. Writing helped her understand that sometimes the ending we fear the most is the beginning we desperately need. Months later, she ran into James by accident. They exchanged a polite hello, nothing more. He looked at her with a softness, maybe even regret. But Rachel didn't feel bitterness. She felt gratitude, for the pain, the clarity, and for finding herself again through the wreckage. Because in the end, she didn't save the marriage. She saved herself. And that was the real love story all along. Rachel's story isn't one of failure. It's one of courage. She loved with all she had, and when that love wasn't returned, she didn't lose herself. She found herself. It's easy to believe that love means holding on, no matter what. But sometimes real love, the kind we owe to ourselves, means knowing when to let go. She walked away not because she stopped loving him, but because she started loving herself more. And that's a lesson many of us take too long to learn. That we can't fix what doesn't want to be fixed. That staying isn't always strength, and leaving isn't always weakness. If you've ever tried to hold together something that kept breaking, let Rachel's story remind you, your worth isn't measured by someone else's ability to see it. It's measured by how gently and firmly you hold your own heart. So if this story moved you, if it made you think about your own journey, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs this message today. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that help us rewrite our own.